in Dublin.
If you go back exactly 100 years ago, the local paper in this city had a headline.
Yeah, the Evening Telegraph, the paper with the news. Dublin, Tuesday, September the 29th, 1921. And the headline says, invitation to conference in London on October the 11th.
So this is Lloyd George saying to De Valera, right, let's get down to business, let's talk about peace, come to London and we'll look at each other in the eye.
Yeah, but I think one of the really interesting things is that the Irish delegation agreed to hold these talks, to go to these talks in London and not on home soil.
We're just coming out of Connolly Station. We'll hop in a cab and head towards our first stop. Hello.
Hi there.
Oh, right.
So it's the week beginning the 26th of September 1921.
And that invite to De Valera from Downing Street had a clearly stated aim to ascertain how the association of Ireland with the community of nations known as the British Empire may be reconciled with Irish national aspirations.
The invite is accepted, and in a couple of weeks the Irish delegates will travel to London. But while we wait for the talks to begin, there's time to explore Dublin.
That's the Custom House, isn't it?
Custom House, yeah.
Actually, it's quite funny seeing these locations now, having talked about them in the podcast.
Yeah.
You know, I've walked past that building hundreds of times and never really given it a second thought. You can't help picturing in your mind, you know, the burning. And do you remember our witness?
Yeah.
Who talked about coming out and down the steps and...
Yeah, with the fag paper.
Yeah.
Funny. Well, Dublin's looking beautiful today, isn't it?
Dublin in the sunshine. We're here because Eamon Phoenix has sent us. He said there's a piece of jewellery we should see for ourselves.
Because this week we're talking about Ireland's contested history. And we mean that quite literally. Right. So we're right outside Leinster House, Dáil Éireann, the Irish government. But attached to the building is one of the sites of the National Museum of Ireland. And there's something in here we want to have a look at.
Oh, wow. Oh, look. Oh, that is stunning. It's a building that impresses, but we're being whisked straight through it to the heart of the archaeological section.
Oh, look at it.
A little golden boat.
Yeah.
It's like a little... It's so intricate. It's the 1st century BC, the Breuter County Derry, hoard of gold objects.
And this is obviously the collar in the middle, isn't it? I do recognise that.
Yeah, that's the centrepiece, isn't it? I mean, it's so beautiful, the flowers on the outside.
Do you want to have a go describing it?
Yeah, it is like a collar, it's a collar.
Or the size of side plate, I would say.
Yeah, would you want to describe it?
Sorry.
I'm trying to think what it reminds me of. It's that kind of, it's almost like a choker collar, but those two sections intertwine. But it's the design on the outside in gold, and it's just kind of roses intertwined the whole way around. It's absolutely beautiful.
And they had a row over this.
They certainly did. And considering it's in Dublin, we know who won.
Here's Eamon Phoenix.
The National Museum of Ireland, the National Gallery, of course, of Ireland, were all in Dublin. And they drew really on the heritage of the whole island under British rule. But it was assumed that certain key artefacts, paintings and the like, with a kind of a northern flavour, would be transported north to give the new state a certain amount of ballast as it started, cultural ballast, as it were. But of course, this never actually happened because Sinn Féin and Dáil Éireann opposed the Partition Act, refused to work the southern part, Parliament, exploited it for propaganda purposes. And so by 1922, as the border was hardening into permanency, Collins and Craig really had a very fractious relationship for most of that period. And Collins gave an order really in January 1922 that southern departments were to refuse to recognise the new Northern Ireland administration. They were to go slow in everything, the transfer of civil servants, of anything else. So it meant that a couple of key artefacts relating to the province of Ulster remained in Dublin and are still there to this day. One was the Breuter Gold Hoard. That had been discovered accidentally by two ploughmen working on the foreshore of Lough Foyle, really near McGilligan, in 1896. They suddenly discovered what looked like an old umbrella handle. And on unearthing it and clearing it, it was the golden Breuter collar. Collars were normally associated with gods in Celtic times, so it had a great significance, you know. As a gold hoard, there was a little filigree golden boat. The other is the Shankill crozier, and this is from, of course, the ancient Shankill, the old church, which gave the modern Shankill Road its name. This is the site of the old church is the graveyard in the upper Shankill Road, where the great Balon stone, the holy water font of the medieval church, still stands. And the crozier was found there in pieces about the 1860s. And that crozier, which was meant to come north in 1921, is still in the National Museum of Ireland in Kildare Street.
And that's where we are. The Breuter Horde has become iconic. It's appeared on Irish postage stamps and coins. And by 1921, it had already caused a legal dispute between the British Museum and the Irish Academy. That was back in 1903. The Irish Academy won and got the hoard. They had a good lawyer, you see, representing them, one Edward Carson.
So along with the Breuter collar, the new Northern Ireland wanted its historical artefacts back. If we go all the way back to episode 1, the Government of Ireland Act had a part in it that said treasures relating to Northern Ireland should be brought north of the border. That included furniture. Unionists were told they could go to Dublin Castle to see what bits they wanted to bring to their new parliament.
But the signing of the treaty caused Ireland's civil war, and the disruption caused by that war, along with Michael Collins's watertight policy of obstructing the Northern government at every turn, means that the most precious treasures ever to have been discovered in the 6 counties were never returned here.
I mean, that does seem incredible, doesn't it? That 100 years have passed and, I mean, as far as we know, there haven't been any attempted court cases to bring them north of the border. That was it. It was accepted.
Look at us laying seeds in somebody's mind. I mean, but if it's in the Government of Ireland Act, you would assume that still stands.
You know, Eamon was saying that the Breuter collar and the Shankill crozier, they're the most valuable of all of the collection in the gold collection in the National Museum. Wow. So it's, you know, it's up there. It's number 1 in the catalogue, if you like.
Given we'd come all this way, we thought it was probably worth our while seeing what other bits relating to 1921 are stored by the National Museum of Ireland. At their Collins Barracks site, we meet Brenda Malone. She's curator of the military history section.
So what we have in here is Michael Collins's death mask. So as you know, he was killed in the ambush at Bale-na-Blow, and his body was taken from Bale-na-Blow up to Dublin just almost immediately afterwards, and he lay in St. Vincent's Hospital. And as he was laying, you can just see at the back of his head there, you can see the imprint of a gauze bandage that was across his head. Now, what a death mask is the artist, in this case it was Albert Power, they take a mould of the face of the dead man. And it's actually quite a common practice all through the 17 and 1800s. It's quite common for very famous people or very rich people to have a death mask taken after their death as a record of their face, especially in days when photography wasn't really very common. So these are probably one of the later death masks that are made.
God, that's kind of shocking, isn't it?
It's kind of slightly taking my breath away, yeah.
Very often with a death mask, if it's an early cast from the mould, you might even catch hairs that were on the person's face or from his head. So you'll get a lot of eyebrow hairs, for example. That's how you can tell that it's quite an early cast from the mask or from the mould. But in this case, you can see the imprint of the gauze bandage that was around Michael's head from where he was shot. And this has been pushed back towards the back and the top of his head as he lays. And that's in order for the artist to get the full cast and full imprint of his face.
I think the thing that strikes me as well as the bandage are the marks on his neck, the lines on his neck.
It's the actual lines on his neck as the skin folds. So it really has, it's an excellent cast. It really has captured his every detail. You can see his hair along the side here, every fold of his ear. And he actually looks quite peaceful.
You know, there's a death mask above it, and I didn't even have to read the label. It's clearly Arthur Griffith.
It is. But I think that's one of the great things about death masks is that you absolutely cannot mistake who they are if it's a good cast.
And there's no mistaking Arthur Griffith. He's always the one easily recognisable because of his moustache.
Now, Griffith is a major figure in 1921, and we haven't dedicated an episode to him, but he'll be a key player in the treaty negotiations in a few weeks.
Yeah, in fact, one British official commented, "A braver man than Arthur Griffith I never met." So what should we know about him?
Born just off O'Connell Street in Dublin in 1871, Griffith was a printer by trade, but he also dabbled in journalism, and he seemed to be pretty good at it too. He became the editor of several radical newspapers.
His passion was for Irish history and culture. He originally rejected the use of force to achieve independence, but by 1913 he joined the Irish Volunteer Force and was helping get weapons into the country.
He was a loyal follower of De Valera, and while Dev was in the States, Griffith was in charge of the Dáil, the unofficial government at the time.
And Griffith was an intellectual. He'd studied independence movements around the world and economies, mapping out what would best suit a new Irish state. He seems always to have been somewhat uncomfortable with the military campaign headed up by Collins, but he was a great mind and he'd use it in Downing Street when negotiations got going.
But those same negotiations took a toll on his health. 10 days before Michael Collin was assassinated in August 1922, Arthur Griffith was bending down to retie his shoelace when he collapsed to the ground, a brain hemorrhage. He was 51. His place in Irish history is overshadowed by Collins and Dev. He wasn't the swashbuckling, handsome soldier, nor did he live to become a great statesman. His widow, it's been suggested, never forgave the new state for the toll its creation had taken on her husband.
In 2013, the Irish Independent, incidentally a newspaper he used to help print, wrote there was certainly no one more dedicated than Arthur Griffith.
As we move around the National Museum, it's like our previous episodes of Year 21 are jumping out at us. There's prisoner art made at Ballykinler Camp. That was episode 30. And way back in episode 18, we spoke about De Valera and his escape from Lincoln Prison.
I always think the sock is almost comical.
This is the large green ankle sock.
This large green
it's more than ankle sock,
thing,
isn't it?
garment almost, because what it actually is a sock. It's the grey sock at the bottom, but you can see that the top of it is green, and that's the sleeve of a jumper which has been sewn onto the sock. And there's been, at the top of the sock has been cut out, and that is in order to make this fit over somebody's boots. And that is to quiet the step of De Valera as he walked across the prison yard to escape, because you have to remember there would have been guards overseeing the yard, and if there had been any indication of any noise of somebody walking across the yard, they would have been shot dead. So as comical as this object is, it is actually what saved his life and enabled the escape.
And it is the sock.
And it is the sock, yes. We don't know where the other sock is.
No, that's life, isn't it,
Yeah.
with socks? But
Socks
will be
typical
socks.
for socks.
And in episode 33, we spoke about women and how they were publicly punished and humiliated. Proof of that remains.
This particular hair was the hair of a woman who was shorn by a member of the IRA. And that we know. But we also know that it was a punishment that was inflicted upon women for any transgression that they may have felt, whether it was a woman was deemed to be in a relationship with the enemy or possibly passing information. It's also a way of controlling. This was in the possession of a man called Michael Barry, and he was a member of the IRA. He was found with it on his person when he was arrested. And that is about as far as we know. We don't know who the woman was, and we'll probably never know. So in the exhibition, she has come to represent every woman that had her hair shorn for whatever reason.
That's not a wisp of hair, that's a full
That is
ponytail.
a full ponytail. It was cut off in clumps. And you can see from the hair itself how it was cut. And the hair almost exudes and tells its own story, the violence that was visited upon this woman. And that is alongside any other type of violence, such as a beating or sexual violence that was visited upon them as well.
We did an episode a few weeks back on this very topic, on women, and we made the point that we will never know the extent of the sexual violence.
Never, yeah.
There's just no way of knowing.
No. You can get hints of it. For example, there's a certain language that is used around it. So you don't, say if you're looking for particular words in documentation, you're not looking for the word rape. You're looking for the word outrage.
In what kind of document would that exist?
If you look at something like the pension files and the claims, there was a woman who was raped, and I believe it might have been a gang rape. Again, the language is quite unclear. But it distressed her so badly that she became very depressed, and then eventually she just lost her mind. And she ended up in a mental institution. And the claim was actually, because there was no other way of making claims, the claim was actually from her family for the loss of her and the fact that she would have brought income to the family and looked after the elderly parents. And very often these are the only times that you get such explicit references to what happened.
The Museum of Ireland is free to visit and it's packed to the gills. But before we leave, Brenda takes us behind the scenes into the storeroom to see up close something that you might have heard about earlier this year.
The door will just lock behind you, so
It, or should we say they, went viral, but they're not on public display. There they are.
Michael Collin's slippers. So you can really see how vibrant the blue is.
Yeah.
Well, Michael Collin's slippers are bright blue with wolves' faces on the bridge of each foot. The wolves are knitted in a pattern that has the feel of a 1980s computer game.
And it's as amazing to you as everyone else that these became social media stars this year.
They were always my favourite. They're kind of, one of my favourites in the collection. I think they're homemade. They definitely don't have any kind of tailor's or maker's label on them. But in those days, people would have made this as an exercise in needle craftsmanship.
I've seen pictures in my own mother's house and in a couple of relatives, pictures entirely done in that stitch, because that was quite common, and they've been passed on in the family.
And so you could make this to a pattern or design your own pattern and then take the textile to the cobblers to have them sold as a pair of slippers.
Very good.
Brilliant. I'm so glad we saw those,
so glad
actually.
we did too, yeah. Full disclosure, go on. Why didn't we talk about them earlier in the year?
We didn't talk about them because we thought, well, look, they've been everywhere, and we didn't want people listening to the podcast going, oh, yeah, they're going on about the slippers as well. So, but actually, when we saw them in real life, because we were very lucky to get access to the slippers, we did get quite excited.
Yes, our resolve vanished.
In a flash. Flash of blue. Next week on Year 21.
They built the hospital and appointed medical staff. But no sooner was the hospital built in 1920 than Ireland was being divided. Suddenly, come 1921, the London Dairy Port and Harbour Board had a hospital on Free State soil.
Year 21 is made by the BBC in Belfast. It's produced by Gráinne McFadden, Elaine Dunseith and Paula McCann.